The proclamation of martial law is not a military takeover. I, as your duly elected President of the Republic, use this power which may be implemented by the military authorities, but still is a power embodied in the Constitution to protect the Republic of the Philippines and our democracy.
Buongiorno listeners, welcome to the presentation of Group 4. What is Constitution and its purpose? In the Philippines we have a total of 6 constitutions, and in this video we're going to talk about one of its constitution. The 1975 Constitutional Authoritarianism.
In 1965, Ferdinand E. Marcos was elected as president. That makes him the 10th president of the Philippines after winning the Philippine presidential election against Diosdado Macapagal. In 1967, the Philippine Congress passed a resolution calling for a constitutional convention to change the 1935 Constitution. Note that the 1935 Constitution was about a political system virtually identical to the American one became operative. The system called a presidential to be elected at large for a 4-year term, subject to 1 re-election, a bicameral Congress, and an independent judiciary. Marcos won the re-election in 1969 in a bid boosted by campaign overspending the use of the government funds. He was the first president to be re-elected because of his desirous remaining in power. There was an election of delegates in November 20, 1970. Convention started formally on June 1, 1971 with the former President Carlos Garcia, but unfortunately he died and was succeeded by another former president, and that is Diosdado Macapagal. Before the convention was finished on September 21, 1972, martial law was declared. The reason behind the martial law was because of the growing communist insurgency, the suppressed increasing civil strife, and of a threat of a communist takeover following a series of a bombing in Manila. Delegates were placed behind the bars and others had voluntary exile. Marcos dictates some provisions of the Constitution, manipulating the document to be able to hold on the power for as long as he could. November 29, 1972, proposed constitution was approved. For the first time in the Philippine history, a parliamentary government or parliamentary-style government established. A prime minister and a president both were elected by the National Assembly. The president was to be elected as symbolic and ceremonial head of the state who will serve for 6 years and could be re-elected to an unlimited number of terms. The executive power was distinguished to the Prime Minister, who was also the head of the government and Commander-in-Chief of Armed Forces.
Presidential Decree Number 73 issued by President Marcos. Setting the date of the plebiscite. Plebiscite means the direct vote of all the members of an electorate according to Google. Plebiscite ratify or reject the proposed constitution on November 30, 1973. The plebiscite was postponed due to Marcos feared that the public might vote to reject the constitution. Instead of a plebiscite, citizen assemblies were held from January 10 to 15, 1973, voting by hand. The citizens were coming and decided on whether to ratify the Constitution, suspend the convening of the Interim National Assembly, continue martial law, or place a moratorium on election for a period of at least several years. January 17, 1973. The President issued a proclamation wherein the Constitution had been ratified by the overwhelming vote of the members of the highly irregular citizen assemblies. In 1976, citizen assemblies decided to allow the continuation of martial law in the following amendments. Interim Batasang Pambansa to substitute for Interim National Assembly. The President to become the Prime Minister and continue to exercise legislative power. martial law was lifted for emergency basis. In 1981, parliamentary system was formally modified to a French style. Executive power to the president, who was to be elected directly. Executive committee who will be created, composed of the Prime Minister and 14 others, and served as the President's cabinet. Some electoral reform was instituted. In 1984, Executive Committee was established and the Vice President was restored. After all the amendments introduced, 1973 Constitution way for President to keep executive powers, abolish the Senate, and never acted as parliamentary system but an authoritarian presidential system. In 1980, situation had been very turbulent. As Marcos amassed power, discontent has also been burgeoning. In August 1983, Benigno Aquino came over and regarded as the most credible alternative to President Marcos, was assassinated after his exile from US. There was a suspicion that the orders to assassinate Aquino came from the top levels of the government and the military. This event caused the opposition against the Marcos authoritarianism regime. Marcos was then forced to hold an early election and declared himself winner despite international condemnation and nationwide protest. A small group of military rebels attempted to stage a coup but failed. However, this triggered what came to be known as EDSA People's Power Revolution of 1986, as people from all walks of life spilled onto the streets. Under pressure from the United States of America, who used to support Marcos and his martial law, the Marcos family fled into exile. His opponent in the election, Benigno Aquino Jr.'s widow, Corazon Aquino, was installed as president on 25th February 1986. And for the last portion of this video, the three issues, problems or events that the Filipino and the country have suffered and the corresponding solutions or recommendations.
Communist Party of the Philippines, New People's Army, or CPP-NPA, was formed on December 26, 1968. During Marcos' era, on August 21, 1971, was their first attack and bombed the stage of Liberal Party rally in Manila Plaza, Miranda. And the late President Ferdinand Marcos was blamed for the attack of CPP-NPA because it killed the opposition. And until now, the group CPP-NPA is still active. In fact, a recent event happened in the rural area of Davao de Oro that 101st Infantry Brigade encountered the NPA and 5 rebels are died. But now, our Philippine government tried to assist the rebels turn into their loyalty to the government. And it have many benefits for them for living, like livelihood assistance, medical assistance, and many more. It encouraged the rebels member to surrender to the authorities, and it can make lessen the communists here in the Philippines.
Martial law. What is martial law? Why this martial law turned as issue here in the Philippine country? Martial law was declared in the Philippines September 21, 1972, became the official date that martial law was established and the day that the Marcos dictatorship began. Ferdinand Marcos suggested to implement martial law in order to strengthen the safety of our people, and every people agreed to implement the martial law for good. Martial law involves the temporary substitution of military authority for civilian rule and is usually invoked in time of war, rebellion, or natural disaster. When martial law is in effect, the military commander of an area or country has unlimited authority to make and enforce laws. It suppressed increasing civil strife and the threat of a communist takeover following a series of bombings That's why Ferdinand Marcos needs to make a law that can secure the safety of his nation. Some people have an issue to martial law because in time of it, many people were tortured. They blame Marcos of that crimes, but Marcos did not intended to kill someone if they have good intentions to the nation. I recommend for this issue is that every people need to abide the law to have a comfortable life and to secure the safety of our nation. Because Ferdinand Marcos do not make a law that people will suffer from the environment of every individuals. If every people here in the Philippines will follow the rules of the president and the rebellions will not against, we will have a peace in our nation.
Lastly, Aquino's assassination is credited with transforming the opposition to the Marcos regime from a small isolated movement into national crusade. It is also credited with thrusting Aquino's widow, Corazon Aquino, into public spotlight and her running for president in 1986 snap election. Although Marcos was officially declared the winner of the election, widespread allegations of fraud and illegal tampering on Marcos' behalf are credited with sparking the People Power Revolution, which resulted in Marcos fleeing the country and conceding the presidency to Mrs. Aquino. The assassination of Benigno S. Aquino Jr. are the biggest issue at their time. By investigating the crime scene and questioning the killer who are the one who pushed him to kill the former president. Lastly, I recommend that don't blame everything to Ferdinand Marcos, not because he is the opposing leader of Benigno Aquino Jr., but we can't blame the people who hates the presidency of Ferdinand Marcos.
Thank you for listening. Group members.
Of troops. They cannot succeed without the support of the people. We cannot succeed without the support of our people. I am happy to see that the reaction throughout the country is favorable. I have received hundreds and hundreds of telegrams from all corners of the Philippines congratulating you and incidentally me for the proclamation of martial law, for the sudden cessation of anarchy and of criminality throughout the land, and of the re-establishment of an atmosphere of brotherhood amongst Filipinos.
Thank you. Thank you.